My father's mother, Jane Mercader, was born in Barcelona to Enrique and Juan Mercader in 1926. Her family was well off until Francisco Franco came to power. He ruled over Spain from 1936 to 1947. Under Franco, my grandmother's father was exiled from the country for being a communist, and she moved in with her aunt in the countryside near Barcelona. Shortly after Enrique, my grandmother's father was exiled. He moved to a small village in the south of France and moved into a little church where an elderly priest took care of him. Several years after he was exiled, my grandmother heard news from the priest saying that Enrique had tragically committed suicide because he knew he could never see his family again or return to his home. Amidst her sadness, my grandmother took refuge in piano, her greatest passion. She had natural talent and was soon asked by major academies of music to travel the country and attend different piano competitions. My father's father was born in Zurich, Switzerland in 1924 to Jane and George Harpaintner. My grandfather, George Harpaintner, named after his father, grew up in the middle class of Zurich. By 18 years old, he was conscripted to the Swiss army and served at the Swiss-German border. Luckily enough for him, Switzerland remained neutral and was never really a major part of the war. After World War II, there weren't many jobs left in Zurich, and most of Europe was a mess. George decided to help his uncle in Africa. His uncle worked in the import-export business in the Belgian Congo, and George saw this as a good opportunity to improve his French skills and visit Africa for the very first time. On my grandfather's way to the Belgian Congo in 1947, he met Jane Mercader on his way to Madrid on a train. My grandmother, Jane, was on her way to a piano competition in Madrid. They were both single at the time and exchanged addresses. Over the next year and a half, they sent each other letters and occasionally visited one another. In 1948, my grandfather George and my grandmother Jane were married. Jane moved to the Belgian Congo with my grandfather. They lived in the Belgian Congo for nearly 10 years and had 3 children, my father's 3 older brothers. In January 1959, there were serious nationalist riots in Congolese cities, and thereafter the Belgians steadily lost control of events in the Congo. These riots were led by Congolese nationalists Joseph Kasavubu and Patrice Lumumba. My grandparents and 3 uncles, who were still young kids at the time, were forced to flee the country for their safety and head back to Switzerland, the country where my grandfather was from. A year after my grandparents and uncles left, the Congolese nationalists finally gained power of the country, and the Congo was proclaimed an independent nation in 1960.
After the family of 5 returned to Switzerland, my grandfather found a job in a remote village in the Jura Mountains. This was where my family lived and still live today. It was here in this little village named Sainte-Croix where my father and his younger brother were born.
My father was born in 1962 and grew up his entire life in the one same village. By his late teens, he took a keen interest in race walking and began training. After much hard training, he was part of the Swiss national race walking team. Before my father began race walking, he was very interested in sports. He remembers watching the Munich Olympics of 1972 and remembers hearing stories of the Munich massacre that took place at those Olympics. The Munich massacre consisted of 11 Israeli athletes and several coaches being murdered by the Black September, a Palestinian militant group with ties to Yasser Arafat. The massacre was the worst tragedy that ever occurred in the history of the Olympic Games. After my father's race walking career had finished, he coincidentally met my mom in the same way that his parents met, in a train. They also exchanged letters as my grandparents had done. My father ended up moving to Los Angeles with my mother, and they were married in LA in 1990. Another major historical event that affected my family was the LA riots of 1992. The LA riots started when the public saw the videotape of African-American motorist Rodney King being severely beaten by white officers. This sparked huge riots and the military was eventually called in to restabilize Los Angeles. After the LA riots, My parents had two children. Etienne, me, their first son, was born in 1993, and their second son, Quentin, was born in 1997. Both my parents are still happily married, and they work together. My mom is a well-known doctor who has done many radio and TV interviews, and my dad is a successful chiropractor.